All right, so today we're going to try something a little different. We're diving deep into Percival Everett's novel, James.
Okay.
And this one's not exactly light reading, I can tell you that it's one of those books that really sticks with you long after you finish it.
Yeah.
But we're going even deeper, get a deep dive into a deep dive.
I like it.
We're using a review from the Digital Bookworm as our guide and exploring all these fascinating themes of identity, memory, and basically how we figure out who we are in a world that sometimes feels like utter chaos.
Well, I think what's really striking about James is how it just throws the traditional storytelling rulebook right out the window.
Oh, yeah.
Everett gives us this fragmented narrative, almost like a shattered mirror,
Oh.
reflecting these broken pieces of memory. And as a reader, you're left to put those pieces back together, and that's where things get really interesting.
So you're saying this fragmented style, it's not just a stylistic choice, there's actually a deeper purpose behind it.
Exactly. Imagine trying to remember a really vivid dream.
Mm-hmm.
You're grasping at these images, emotions, but the clear narrative,
Yeah.
it's just out of reach. That's the experience Everett creates, and it directly connects to the novel's whole exploration of identity. He actually uses a technique called stream of consciousness, which basically just throws you right into the protagonist's thoughts and memories.
It's interesting you say that because it makes me think about how the book tackles this idea of like a fixed identity.
Right.
The review mentioned that, and I'm really curious, how does this fragmented storytelling actually force us to confront that notion?
Well, think about it this way. We often try to present this polished version of ourselves to the world.
Yeah.
Like a neat and tidy story of who we are.
Yeah, totally.
But James just blows that all up.
Huh.
This fragmented narrative. It forces us to confront the idea that maybe identity isn't this single static picture.
Okay.
Maybe it's more like a constantly shifting kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
Where memories, experiences, and even the stories that other people tell about us all play a part.
That's pretty powerful. It reminds me of that part where the protagonist, James, he's trying to remember a specific memory, this seemingly happy one from his childhood. But every time he revisits this memory, the details, they change.
Right.
It's like even his own past. It's unreliable.
That's a perfect example, and it leads us right into another theme, memory as a battleground. Memory isn't just this passive storage space in James. It's an active force shaping James's present and how he sees himself. It's both a source of comfort and pain, a place where his personal trauma and his own history collide.
So speaking of history, the review also mentions how James tackles these social and cultural critiques, particularly in the context of American society.
Yeah.
Can you give us a specific example of how that plays out in the novel?
Well, Everett doesn't shy away from the complexities of race and power dynamics in America at all. And you see this most clearly in how James navigates the world as a black man, constantly facing prejudices and societal expectations that try to define him.
So it's not just about his individual identity, but how that identity is constantly being shaped and in some ways constrained by the society that he lives in.
Exactly. And Everett even challenges the very idea of history as this fixed narrative.
Okay.
He dives into how history can be manipulated, how certain voices are amplified while others are silenced. It's like a puzzle where someone's intentionally hiding key pieces, making it impossible to see the full picture.
Wow. Okay, I'm starting to see how all these elements are interwoven. We have this fragmented narrative reflecting the fluidity of identity, the concept of memory as this active force, and then this layer of social commentary woven throughout. It's a lot to process.
And we haven't even touched upon Everett's writing itself.
Oh, right.
He has this incredible ability to capture small details, seemingly insignificant moments with such precision that they take on this profound weight.
It's like those everyday moments suddenly become significant.
Exactly. You might be reading about something as simple as the way light falls on a leaf.
Right.
And suddenly it feels loaded with meaning.
So he's not just dealing with these big abstract ideas, he's grounding them in the tangible, the everyday.
Precisely. And he manages to balance that with a surprising dose of wit.
Really?
Everett has this knack for injecting humor into even the darkest moments, which keeps the novel from feeling too heavy or preachy.
That makes me think about something the reviewer mentioned, Everett's unique ability to balance wit, insight, and emotional depth. It sounds like a really delicate balancing act.
It is, and he pulls it off masterfully. There's a scene, for example, where James is reflecting on this childhood memory of feeling pure joy while swinging on a swing set. But almost in the same breath, he makes this wry comment about the absurdity of finding such deep meaning in something as simple as a swing.
That's fascinating. It's like he's acknowledging the absurdity of the human condition while also pointing to those moments of pure, unadulterated joy that we all
Yeah,
experience.
exactly. And it's that tension, that ability to hold these seemingly contradictory ideas together that makes James such a thought-provoking and ultimately rewarding read.
So we've established that James isn't a passive read. It's a book that demands your active participation, forcing you to grapple with these complex ideas about identity, memory, and the world around us. But how does Everett actually use his writing, his literary techniques to achieve this? What are some of the tools in his arsenal?
One of the most striking tools he uses is this fragmented narrative structure that we've been talking about.
Right.
And it's not just about presenting a jumbled sequence of events. It's about mirroring the way our minds actually work.
Hmm.
Think about it. Your own memories, they're not linear, are they?
No, not at all.
It's more like these flashes of images, emotions, snippets of conversations all swirling around.
Exactly.
And that's precisely what Everett captures in James. He pulls you into this stream of consciousness, forcing you to piece together the fragments of James's life, much like you might piece together your own memories. But here's the catch. He doesn't give you all the pieces.
Oh.
He leaves gaps, forcing you to fill them in with your own interpretations.
So you're actively involved in creating meaning rather than just passively receiving a neatly packaged story. It makes me think about how the review praised Everett's use of ambiguity. It's like he's saying, here's the raw material, now you make sense of it.
Precisely. And that ambiguity, it's
Yeah.
not just a stylistic quirk, it's directly tied to the novel's exploration of identity. James is a book that refuses to give you easy answers.
Huh.
It challenges you to question your assumptions, to sit with the discomfort of uncertainty, and to embrace the idea that maybe there isn't one definitive answer to the question, who am I?
This makes me think about a specific passage in the book where James is looking at himself in the mirror.
Yeah.
He describes seeing a stranger staring back at him, someone he doesn't recognize. It's this incredibly unsettling moment that really highlights the fragility of identity.
That's such a powerful image, and it speaks to the core of what Everett is exploring. It's like he's saying, look, even the person you think you know best yourself is ultimately a mystery. And that can be terrifying, but it can also be incredibly liberating. Because if identity is this fluid, ever-evolving thing, then maybe we have more agency in shaping it than we realize.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So we have this fragmented narrative forcing us to confront the complexity of identity. We have ambiguity woven into the very fabric of the story. But the review also mentions that Everett is a master of balancing those weighty themes with a surprising dose of wit. How does that play out in the novel?
Well, Everett has this incredible ability to inject humor into even the most serious situations. It's not slapstick humor,
Right.
but rather a subtle, often ironic wit that keeps the novel from becoming too heavy or didactic, like a breath of fresh air in the midst of all the philosophical and emotional intensity.
Can you give us an example, something that really stood out to you?
Sure, there's a scene where James is attending this rather pretentious academic conference.
Oh, boy.
He's surrounded by all these intellectuals who are pontificating about identity and meaning, using all this jargon and convoluted theories.
Sounds about right.
And in the middle of it all, James makes this dry observation about how the entire discussion reminds him of a dog chasing its own tail.
Oh, my gosh.
A lot of frantic activity, but ultimately going nowhere.
That's hilarious. And so typical of Everett's style, he manages to poke fun at these intellectual pretenses without ever being condescending or dismissive.
Exactly. And that's what makes his humor so effective. It's intelligent humor rooted in observation and insight. It allows us to laugh at the absurdity of the situation without losing sight of the underlying seriousness of the themes he's exploring.
It sounds like Everett is walking this tightrope, balancing these profound ideas about identity, memory, and history with these moments of levity and humor. How does he manage to pull it off without having the novel feel jarring or disjointed?
It all comes down to his masterful control of tone and voice. Everett has this uncanny ability to shift between registers seamlessly. He can be profound and philosophical one moment, and then witty and playful the next, without ever losing the reader's trust. You never feel like he's trying too hard or being insincere.
That makes me think about how the review mentioned Everett's unparalleled ability to balance wit, insight, and emotional depth. It sounds like he's not just playing with ideas, he's engaging with them on a deeply personal and emotional level.
You're absolutely right. And that's what sets James apart from so many other novels that deal with similar themes. It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's a deeply felt exploration of what it means to be human, to grapple with questions of identity and meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
We've talked a lot about Everett's writing style and how he uses it to explore these complex themes. But let's bring it back to the reader for a moment. How does all of this actually impact you as you're reading James? What kind of experience does he create?
Reading James is like being dropped into a labyrinth without a map. You're constantly disoriented, challenged, forced to reevaluate your assumptions. Yeah. But here's the thing, it's also incredibly exhilarating. Because as you wander through this labyrinth, you start to make your own connections to discover your own truths. You're not just passively consuming a story, you're actively participating in creating meaning.
That's a powerful image. The reader as an active participant in the meaning-making process. It seems like Everett is really pushing the boundaries of what a novel can be, how it can engage the reader on multiple levels.
Exactly. And I think that's why James has resonated with so many readers. It's not a book that offers easy answers or comforting resolutions. It's a book that challenges you to think for yourself, to embrace ambiguity, and to find beauty in the midst of chaos.
And speaking of chaos, let's talk about how Everett brings those larger social and cultural critiques into this very personal, very intimate story. How does he weave those threads together?
Well, Everett doesn't hit you over the head with his social commentary.
Okay.
Instead, he subtly weaves it into the fabric of James's personal journey. Remember how we talked about memory being a battleground?
Yeah.
Well, for James, that battleground is also deeply intertwined with his experiences as a black man in America. Imagine carrying the weight of history on your shoulders, not just your personal history, but the collective history of your people. A history marked by oppression and injustice.
Wow.
That's part of what James is wrestling with.
I see.
He's constantly navigating a world that tries to define him based on his race, a world where his very presence can be perceived as a threat.
That makes me think about the part where James is mistaken for someone else, someone who has committed a crime, and suddenly his own identity, his own innocence, it's called into question simply because of the color of his skin.
Exactly. That scene is so powerful because it highlights how easily our identities can be misconstrued, manipulated, and even criminalized by these societal forces beyond our control. It's a stark reminder of the systemic racism that continues to permeate American society.
It seems like Everett is urging us to consider how these larger power structures shape our individual experiences, often in ways we might not even be aware of.
Absolutely. And he's not just pointing fingers. He's prompting us to question our own assumptions and biases. He's asking us to look beyond the surface and consider the historical and social forces that have shaped our worldviews.
So it's not just about understanding James's story, it's about understanding our own place within these larger systems of power and privilege.
Precisely. And that's what makes James such a challenging and ultimately rewarding read. It's not just a story about one man's search for identity. It's a mirror reflecting back at us, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the society we live in.
And to connect this back to what we were discussing earlier, Everett does all of this while maintaining a sense of hope, even humor amidst the darkness. It's never a hopeless or nihilistic exploration.
You're right. Despite the heavy themes and the often unsettling nature of the narrative, James ultimately offers a message of resilience and even a glimmer of hope. Remember, this is a novel that celebrates the power of storytelling. Even in the face of chaos and uncertainty, we have the ability to shape our own narratives, to find meaning and connection through the stories we tell and the stories we choose to believe in.
As we wrap up our deep dive into James, what's the most crucial takeaway you'd like to leave our listener with?
More than anything, James is a call to action. It's an invitation to question, to challenge, to refuse to accept easy answers or simplistic narratives. It's a reminder that the search for identity is a lifelong journey, a journey that requires us to constantly engage with ourselves and the world around us. And most importantly, it's a reminder that we all have a story to tell, a story that deserves to be heard.
Beautifully said. And for our listener, I'd add this. Let James be a catalyst for your own exploration. Reflect on the themes we've discussed today. Consider how your own experiences have shaped your understanding of identity memory and the stories you carry within you. What narratives have shaped your worldview? What voices have been amplified and what voices have been silenced in your own life? These are questions worth pondering, and I encourage you to keep exploring them long after this deep dive is over.
Remember, as James discovers throughout the novel, your identity isn't a fixed point. It's a process of constant evolution, a dance between the stories you tell yourself and the stories the world tells about you.
Are you?
Embrace that complexity, that ambiguity. It's in those spaces, those in-between moments that you'll find the most profound truths.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of Percival Everett's James. Until next time, keep diving deep and never stop questioning the world around you.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, how do those two things connect?
Yeah.
Well, imagine carrying the weight of history on your shoulders. Not just your own personal history, but the collective history of your people. A history that's marked by oppression and injustice. That's a huge part of what James is struggling with.
Yeah.
He's constantly having to navigate a world that tries to define him based on his race.
Right.
A world where even just his presence can be seen as a threat.
You know, it's interesting you say that because it reminds me of that scene where James is mistaken for someone else.
Right.
Someone who committed a crime.
Yeah.
And suddenly his own identity, his own innocence, it's questioned just because of the color of his skin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That scene is so powerful because it shows just how easily our identities can be, misconstrued,
Yeah.
twisted, even criminalized by these forces that are totally outside of our control. It's like a harsh reminder of the systemic racism that's still so present in American society.
It feels like Everett is really pushing us to consider how these larger systems, power structures,
Yeah.
really shape our individual experiences, often in ways we're not even conscious of.
Absolutely. And he's not just pointing fingers either. He's making us question our own assumptions, our own biases.
Yeah.
He wants us to look beyond the surface, to consider the historical and social forces that have shaped how we see the world.
So it's not just about understanding James's story, it's about understanding our own place within these larger systems of power and privilege.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes James such a challenging but ultimately rewarding read. It's not just a story about one man's search for identity.
Right.
It's a mirror reflecting back on us, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and about the society that we live in.
And to bring it back to something we discussed earlier, Everett manages to do all of this while still maintaining a sense of hope, even humor in the midst of all that darkness.
Yeah, it's true.
It's never a hopeless or nihilistic exploration.
You're right. Despite the heavy themes and the often unsettling nature of the story, James ultimately offers a message of resilience and even a little glimmer of hope. And remember, this is a novel that celebrates the power of storytelling. Even when faced with chaos and uncertainty, we still have the ability to shape our own narratives, to find meaning and connection through the stories that we tell and the stories that we choose to believe in.
As we start wrapping up our deep dive into James, what would you say is the most important thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
Well, more than anything, I think James is a call to action. It's an invitation to question, to challenge, to refuse to accept simple answers or easy narratives. It reminds us that the search for identity is a lifelong process, a journey that requires us to constantly engage with ourselves and the world around us.
That's a great point.
And maybe most importantly, it reminds us that we all have a story to tell, a story that deserves to be heard.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And for our listeners out there, I would add this. Let James be a starting point for your own exploration. Think about the themes we've talked about today. How have your own experiences shaped how you see identity memory, the stories you carry within you? What narratives have shaped your worldview? What voices have been amplified and what voices have been silenced in your own life? These are all questions worth thinking about, and I really encourage you to keep exploring them even after this deep dive is over.
Remember, like James discovers throughout the novel, your identity isn't this fixed point. It's a process of constant change. It's like a dance between the stories you tell yourself and the stories the world tells about you. Embrace that complexity. Embrace the uncertainty. It's in those spaces, those in-between moments, where you'll find the most profound truths.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of Percival Everett's James. We'll see you next time. Keep diving deep and never stop questioning the world around you.